Welcome to the latest program in our Lavender Talk series from the Commonwealth Club of California and San Francisco Pride, which pulled together today's program. I'm John Zipper, the club's Vice President of Media and Editorial. We hope you're staying safe and are well wherever you are, and we look forward to seeing you in person someday in the future at the Commonwealth Club's headquarters in San Francisco. Until that happens, we are doing all of our programming online. This is the latest in nearly 250 online programs the club has produced just in the past 6 months. You can find all of our upcoming programs, as well as audio and video from our past programs and learn how you can help support our program production at commonwealthclub.org. If you are watching us live on YouTube or Facebook, you can use the chat function to post questions for the panelists, and we will work some of them into our conversation here today. Now, we would like to thank Gilead Pride Alliance and Comcast for their generous support for the Lavender Talks series. We also extend a thank you to the San Francisco Pride Legacy Partners. Now, I would like to introduce Michelle Miao. She's a member of the Commonwealth Club Board of Governors, a past board president for SF Pride, and she's the longtime producer and host of The Michelle Miao Show. Good to see you again, Michelle.
Thank you so much, John. Thanks for that awesome introduction. It's always a great pleasure to be doing this, and of course with you. But you're off today. You kind of got the easy job in doing the introduction. But it's a fun program. It's a great program, actually. And I'm very, very glad and super grateful and thankful to the Commonwealth Club and San Francisco Pride for extending the Lavender series beyond the Pride season, because you can, now we are able to connect with our entire communities and having these very important conversations. And so without further ado, I'd like to introduce you to our panel this afternoon. We're going to do a discussion on body positivity and the kink culture, kink and BDSM. So we have Beth Bicoastal Hunt, who is the Leather and LGBTQ Cultural District Manager Emeritus and lifelong artist and performer. Danny Tan Nguyen, who is a writer, a Lambda Literary and Ragdale Foundation Kuhneman Fellow, and also a columnist for Recon. And Bianca Spencer, Miss Rubber San Francisco 2020, co-founder of the Unruly Social Club and former chairwoman of the Lesbian Sex Mafia. Welcome, everyone.
Yay. Thanks for having us.
That's awesome. Well, this is such a treat. We're just a few days shy of Folsom Street Fair, and this, I think, is the first time that it's gone all virtual. It's a traditional event here in San Francisco that traditionally draws out over 50,000 people from around the world. And so this weekend virtually will be connected, around the world again, but it will look a little different. So I kind of feel like this is like kicking off Folsom Street Fair with all three of you. So thank you for being here. We'll start with some context for our viewers and listeners who are tuning in. And again, like John said, we want you engaged. So send us some questions and comments for our panel today, and we'll get them to them. We'll get it to them. But the context. So it's believed, at least from a Rolling Stones article that I read earlier this morning, that the queer representation in kink and BDSM culture or subculture kind of grew out after World War II, having this attraction to the uniform, the buzz cut, kind of a look or feel. Yeah. And interestingly, in my reading, there then grew the first ever gay motorcycle club. And I think they were called the Warlocks, the one out in San Francisco. And the first, I guess, gay club that catered to the leather community was called the Gold Coast in Chicago, which then became the birthplace of International Mr. Leather Conference in the late 70s. And so I give this context to give you some idea of the masculine representation in BDSM kink culture, and it has since evolved in the last couple of decades to, I would say, be much more inclusive. And that is because and due to the hard work of our incredible community. And so let's start from there. Let's start from each of you and kind of your understanding, what your recollection, your knowledge is of queer representation and the history of it in BDSM and kink culture. We'll start with Beth.
I knew I was going to go first. There's a very heavy masculine overtone to leather as it's known in pop culture, right? Even if you see it in 50 Shades of Grey and all that stuff, right? That we pretty much hate in our scene. There's this overtone of masculinity, but it's actually like a incorrect, inaccurate description for whatever reason. Probably because of the patriarchy in our country, males get the spotlight first. But if you ask folks like Gail Rubin and our senior dykes, they definitely will say that women have been around and doing the leather community just as long, but maybe not as loud about it, perhaps. But that is for sure changing. And it's been wonderful to be asked to speak here. And I hope I can represent some folks who identify as big and fat and beautiful, and repping my Italian folks and the East Coast over here. So it's, San Francisco is my home for 15 years, but it is everywhere. And like you said, the birthplace of International Mr. Leather was Chicago. There is in Folsom East, also out here in New York, and all over the world. So the BDSM kink culture and leather bleed together a little bit. There's, some sub communities like we do, but there is a big international representation. And so it's great to have these discussions and kind of take away maybe some stigmatisms or like people who have a wrong idea about our situation because of pop media highlighting not the most accurate aspects.
Danny.
Hi. You brought up a Rolling Stones interview or article that was put out recently. I do want to encourage folks. There is a lot of kind of misperception and also romantic myth making around the origins of leather and its connection to, say, masculine subcultures such as post-World War II paramilitary uniforms, plus sign the road dog biker, plus sign the cowboy, as kind of icons within American representation of masculinity and how that's influenced the Leatherman or leather culture. Some of that myth can also be debunked or affirmed in a recent presentation that my club, Onyx Northwest, recently did this past weekend. Actually, we had Gail Rubin, who is one of the foremost academics writing about leather culture and doing research, particularly around BDSM leather queerness. And so I do encourage folks, if you are interested in learning about that history and having it based in data and research, please check out Onyx Northwest online. That recording is available both on YouTube and on Facebook Live. So check that out. But the question that you were asking is how has things evolved? I think one thing that I'm thinking about in terms of masculinity and the centering of that and how it's changed and shifted over time is recently Judith Butler actually just recently did a interview. You can probably find this online, but she's being asked about what is your take on TERF culture, trans exclusionary, radical feminists, and the pushback against trans inclusivity within radical feminism. And she says that, well, gender has always been a social construct and it's constantly changing. And I think that one thing that for me is really important, particularly as somebody who I identify as masculine passing. I'm non-binary and, fluid in terms of my gender representation. But that being said, I think there's something to be said about how back in the day, especially in post-World War II culture, when queer men were having to survive using masculinity and masculine passingness to cultivate power or respectability, that was something that was necessary for survival back then. And we're not in the same place anymore. We are in a place in which we are questioning gender and we're questioning and challenging aspects of patriarchy in terms of maleness as well as femaleness and non-binary folks. And so I think there's something to be said about the evolution of gender also being part of what it means to evolve in terms of BDSM practitioners.
Thank you, Danny. And Bianca.
Well, I think a lot of us got to know the leather culture through one of the most popular artists that there is, Tom of Finland. And Tom of Finland had millions and millions of fans all over the world, and there were people who were just oozing masculinity, right? They were just like the rippled muscles, the T-shaped body. It was just completely masculine. But we keep forgetting to mention the International Miss Leather competition in San Jose. And we have been around for over 30 years. I'm actually one of the producers. of the Miss International, Miss Leather competition and Boot Black competition weekend. So they've been around for just as long as the men have, but I agree with Beth. I think that our history and our roles, and even just femme people and femme roles within the history of BDSM, have completely been men washed in the patriarchy and all those horrible things that we hate to talk about. But it feels like we have always been here. I'm the former chairwoman of LSM, Lesbian Sex Mafia. We are the oldest women's BDSM continuously running group in the country, if not the world. And we've been around for over 30 plus years. I think that the hanky code and the leather jackets and the Levi look, I think it's really sexy. And I think that's why people identify so much with it. But I think it also completely makes people who identify as femme or wear heels or do other things like that, I think it really just makes them invisible, because everyone wants the sexiness that they see on TV and the sexiness that has been given to us in media and in Hollywood and all of those other things.
Let's dive into the next part of the conversation, and where there might, some of this misconceptions were born out of. I think, especially for those who are joining us for the very first time and you're hearing for the first time of kink culture, BDSM, all of you had mentioned roles. And I think for some folks, like when we think about roles in kink culture, especially if, Danny, you'd brought up earlier before the program started, someone being dominant or submissive, these roles in kink sometimes could then be misunderstood as if, top is more masculine or bottoms are not, or it's still focused on the binary, I guess, if you were to read this stuff in mainstream, or to Beth's point, watch things like 50 Shades of Grey. And so if you all could, start the discussion in talking about specific roles and explaining that a little bit before we get into addressing issues within kink culture and representation, that would be great. We'll start with Danny.
Oh man, okay. I think for the uninitiated, binaries exist heavily, but that's also because it's influenced from like heterosexist culture. I think for a lot of folks, particularly within at least the sub communities that I'm active in, particularly in the queer BDSM world and leather world, is we understand and have been interrogating for a very long time. Those of us who are like experienced players, we try to shrug some of that bullshit off. I think that like those of us who have worked through our heterosexism or continuously work on moving beyond that, we understand that there's a difference between being masculine and feminine, and that it's not necessarily correlated with being a top or a bottom, and that's also not even correlated necessarily with being a dominant or a submissive or a switch. It's just like take all these roles and responsibilities and these ways of modes of playing, and understand that like we possess every single variable within that spectrum. You are completely capable. Most people are playing across the spectrum. Some people lean more into one side or the other, but that doesn't mean that like we exist within those binaries. So I think that's one of the things that I at least appreciate within the active players that I engage with and the sub communities I choose to build community with, is that we've done some of the work to shrug that off. Doesn't mean that we're done doing that work, but rather I think we're ahead of the curve as far as like understanding that masculine, feminine, butch, femme, male, femaleness, like these are just like fun labels to play with, but they don't necessarily define us.
I would build upon that also, like, as we travel through space and time, and I mean, I'm in New Jersey again right now, right? And so I'm reminded about how vanilla is the term we use in our community, how basic, most people's days are, and they don't have the colorfulness and the exquisite, full spectrum of everything we have in San Francisco. And so a lot of it, I think, comes down to exposure. And, I like, if you could look at a literary standpoint or a linguistic standpoint, I guess, like, you need to have terms at some point, right? You're trying to describe something. You have to have terms, or else you're like, it's, and like, you can't get anywhere. So, vocabulary and language evolved and became binary because it's really easy to be like, boom, 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 boom. We're putting people in categories, and it's like easy, like a little spreadsheet. But realistically, none of us are 2D cartoon characters. We all have these full dynamics, like I get, no pun intended, pegged as like, this like hard femme, top, dominant, meh, meh, meh. And if you see me and my husband's relationship, like, man, we are like classically gender stereotype rolled sometimes. And I'm like, oh, we're doing that. And like, it is what it is, like, it's kind of cliche, but it also kind of feels like role play for me, to be fair. It's like a reverse. But like, that's what I think the joy of our culture is that, like Danny's saying, as you get more submersed in this, like I started as a youngin', maybe 19. No, I'm lying. I was like 16 when I started with BDSM. Yeah. But I was very young. I was actually like 15. And I jumped in, and I was like consenting and excited and doing it all. And, as I evolved quickly, I ended up in my 20s, like realizing like, this is just as boring as doing the expected roles. And the fun came from like literally trying on different hats and doing all the roles. And like, now when people ask me to identify myself, I'm like, how much time do you have? And maybe I can give you a different version on Tuesday, because it changes. And I think that's what's like wonderful about our culture as we are moving through time and space together, is that we're coming back to this amorphous phase where like binaries aren't really sticking. And to the point of today's lecture, after we talk a little more with roles with Bianca, I think body types is right in that also. Like, trying to classify body types is right up this alley too. So I don't want to keep going on that tangent, but Bianca, I know you've got some interesting comments, I'm sure.
I do, because I am a Black woman, and I am a feminine Black woman. And as a feminine Black woman, I am seen usually one of two ways. I am either your mistress and you're going to serve me, man, or I am completely subservient to you and anything that you say, sir, and I get on my hands and knees. That's not me. That's never been me. I can't fake it if I wanted to. But I think as you get, I don't want to say older, but as you get deeper, like Beth was saying, deeper into the culture, you kind of figure out that those roles that were told to you were really false. They were really false, and you really truly didn't understand what they actually meant. So for me, I'm a switch, because who knows what Tuesday might bring? We don't know. For me, I'm submissive to a point. I'm submissive to certain people, but I'm not a submissive person by nature. In my work life, I am a powerhouse saleswoman. I make shit happen. I have $1 million accounts. And then at home, sometimes I just need to put that power woman to the side and just be who I am. I think our roles in the binary kind of do change based on our day. Tomorrow I might want to top somebody, or maybe I want you to be at my feet and serve me, young man. But most days that's not who I am, and I'm not into those stereotypes. But I think it's as you get deeper and further and figure out where you stand and where your kinks are, that's when you're able to truly figure out where you belong on the scales.
We're already starting to get some questions from the audience, and so I'll go ahead and interrupt myself and ask a question, because it leads also to what we are going to talk about, body positivity and sizes, all sizes is kink, or kink culture, kink communities, a safe place for all people, all sizes. We'll get to that. But here's a question for Beth. Beth mentioned the opportunity to respond to some popular misconceptions of leather culture. What are some of those myths, and how does she respond to them?
Meaning like my 50 Shades of Grey reference? I'm guessing.
I think so, yeah.
I think, like Bianca was saying, these stereotypes of like, you're either this or this, and and really that's where fetishizing comes about. a little side note, I have a master's in psychology, and through that 10-year process, I obviously focused a lot on kink and BDSM because that was my process. But as I went through that discovery, I found that there's like these fetishizings, I feel, tend to happen when people shame certain aspects, and then it becomes like something you really want because you're not supposed to have it. And just one theory, but there's these pigeonholings and these stereotypings and these making it like 2D character cutouts. When I was doing sex work for a while, I, for the most part, 99% of the time was whipping, flogging, here, be my ashtray, wear a maid's costume, clean my apartment. My favorite was humiliation play, and ironically, my husband hates it. But it's so I know, Danny, getting a little hot. But that was what I was really great at. That was a really fun role to play. But like Bianca was saying, it's not realistically who I am every day. That'd be exhausting. That's why I get paid to do that. So, and that role is fun. And I think that my idea when I was studying psychology, and as I get back finally into writing and discussing things with people and being a more active part of this community, is highlighting like the fun aspect. Like there's a reason why people role play is so in our community. It's a thing, it's a tool, it's something that we can use to express ourselves, to work through things, to just straight up have a good time, to get to know people, explore all of your rainbow and spectrum. I think when we see the cartoon characters, the Tom of Finland, the movie representations, it's like a comic book. I mean, that's a reference I constantly use, is just feeling like you're a 2D cartoon character. Like when I got the honor of being on the Folsom poster a couple of years ago, and all glammed up, and when I went through the fair that year, like multiple people really expected me to be somebody different than I am. And I think it's because of that, because we do these descriptives and put people in these boxes. So I think that's how I want to answer that question, is that just realize that those representations in pop media aren't the full story. It's just a fun highlighting. Danny, are you trying to?
Yeah, could I add to that? I
do.
love the comic book analogy, simply because the way, and I've written about this before, but I like to say that leather and drag are two sides of the same coin. Traditionally, we've adopted this attitude that leather is an amplification of masculinity, or it can be. And likewise with say drag, especially with drag queens, traditional drag queenism is the amplification and the performance of femininity, often for entertainment or ironic or performative purposes, right? And then likewise with leather, it's oh, I'm gonna butch myself up, or I'm gonna hyper feminize the power of myself by putting myself in gear, and all of a sudden it's just I'm this amplified version of it.
Flying. Yeah, and I mean, it's fun to step into that, right? There's a reason why most people love Halloween or costume parties, because there's fun about stepping out of your day-to-day and being something that's attracted to you. You're attracted to things for a reason. It's something you need in your life more than most times. And so go there with us and have a good mentor while you do it, which is why we have programs like that in our community and resources, because if you get with the wrong folks, it can be really scary. So while we're saying this whole exploratory, statements about BDSM, it is intense at times. So, having someone you can trust and go through those things, having a good sex worker is actually a huge plus in your life. And, there's safe places that we can probably reference for you later if you want. But anyway, I hope I answered what they were looking for. If not, there you go.
Ask again if Beth
yeah
didn't answer.
Yeah.
I think you did. Well, let's talk about safety and inclusion of everyone in kink culture. This is my own impression, but then again, I'm not very active in the kink and BDSM community, so you'll be the ones to tell us. But it's my impression, especially when I am out there, Folsom Street Fair or any of the leather events, that it's pretty inclusive, it's pretty diverse, and at least with the history of kink culture and LGBTQI folks, and I should say LGBTQI plus, there's at least an opportunity of consent and safety and communication in terms of, well, like all of you have been saying for the first half hour. But I'd love to hear your thoughts to expand on that. I mean, there's a reason why we're talking, the title is body positivity and what your experiences may have been in kink culture and BDSM. So we'll begin with Bianca.
So I think there needs to be a very clear understanding that there's two different types of community within the leather community. There's the queer leather community and there's the men's leather community. The queer leather community is the community that I am a part of. It's where my club is from, Unruly Social Club. We made our own space. It is diverse. The community is diverse in terms of, yes, on the rainbow spectrum, we are all equally available and identified. But on the color spectrum, it's not necessarily the same thing. And so there's a lot of very small pockets for people who are not white. So I think that's something that we really do need to call out, and we need to make aware that there's very small space no matter where you are if you're a person of color. Now, that being said, the queer community is super big on consent. The queer community polices themselves. We call out violators. We call out, there's bad people where whatever you do, wherever you're doing it. And we're just in a hypersexualized space. So we're going to have just as many bad folks as you have in real life, but we're going to find them faster because unfortunately, this is how we find them. So we police ourselves. We're big on consent, all those other things. The men's community has a very different culture than the queer community. When I go to men's events, my consent is violated almost regularly. When I go to men's events, there are more times than often not that someone has to come to my defense because someone touched me, someone grabbed me, someone made a statement that they shouldn't have. I was accosted using the bathroom. I've had trans friends who went to conferences and contests who were kicked out of the own events that they were invited to because of the bathroom issues. So I really think as a queer community, yes, we are everything that you said. But if we're going to include the gay men in the community, we're not even halfway close to where we need to be.
Yeah. May I? I just wanted to affirm what Bianca just shared. I have very kind of similar experiences. And I also am speaking as somebody who, does slipstream between like queer kink spaces and gay cisgender male spaces, which is predominantly very white centric. I mean, all you have to do is take a look at the contest system. All you have to do is take a look at the porns. All you have to do is look at the actual like body count within the circuit parties that are happening at Folsom, at Up Your Alley, at any of the international like queer high holiday like festival weekend, type of stuff. And, it's really interesting because I would agree. I also feel that as somebody who has worked within the public health sector for like over 16 years, and I've done a lot of mental health services within like gay men client base, yeah, I think that there's something to be said about like consent violation, but also like we're also talking about an entire community that has like absolutely atrocious history of sexual assault. A lot of us are, have experienced sexual assault or rape. A lot of us experience. I mean, pretty much all gay men have body dysmorphia too. And so sometimes that kind of violence gets perpetrated. And then also our own body dysmorphia issues are getting processed and like pushed onto each other as well. And so that's why you always have like this weird irony of like guys going, must get rid of toxic in community, need a king who can handle. And yet they're like, all right, I'm roided out and here at the circuit party and I only like fucking other white men. Oh my God. I'm going to call myself out on this. Like as a masculine presenting person, I'm not above the fact that, like, in order for me to have found a certain level of passability within gay male spaces, I had to grow out this beard. I had to fucking start pumping my lifting weights in order to gain a certain passability in terms of like Western white male standards of beauty.
Mm.
You know, like, and I'm going to quote Bianca's co-founder of the Unruly Social Club, but Girl Complex, when she stepped down from her International Ms. Leather title, one of the things, and I'm not going to be nearly as eloquent as Girl Complex, but she said, as something along the lines of, as a Black queer woman, it is a radical act for me to even exist in front of you right here, owning agency over my sexuality and my body. And likewise, I think there's something to be said about, like, within like gay male spaces and gay male kink culture, it is a radical act if you're trans, if you're a person of color, if you're femme, or if you are something beyond this like standard of like white masculine representation of what like Western beauty looks like.
I also, being white, want to just chime in because it really sucks. I hate being white sometimes because being with white men, man, it's been tough. Like, I feel like I've endured that my whole life, and it is exhausting. And I am proud and happy, and more than no problem, I will do all of that emotional labor, but I'm constantly explaining and educating. The babies, let me tell you, and that does not an age description. You could be 75 and be a child in my eyes about your understanding of your race and where you belong in the world. And there is just not enough time to educate everybody. So I just want to back up Bianca and Danny's statements of the frustrations that one can face in this community, particularly the men's community. I am known for swimming in those waters, and it was never easy. And I get sexually assaulted every single time. One way I've dealt with that is clapping back. I don't know how else to explain it, as well as quite literally being like, all right, if you're touching my boob, I'm going to touch your boob. You know, it's tough. It's been tough. There's been some good calls and bad in that. But trying to educate people constantly about how consent and how to navigate those waters, because again, you see in pop culture and a lot of other places where, like, oh, you go to a sex club and you can just do whatever you want. And like, that is not accurate, nor are a lot of our bars and spaces actually sex clubs. They're like social clubs. And that happens a lot. And being a fat femme, it is constantly, I felt like a lot of mommy transference. And also like, the cis, right? I'm a sister. I mean, I have 3 brothers. That's an easy role for me to be in. But like this, oh, that's Beth and she's our kid's sister kind of thing. So we can do whatever we want to her. And, you know, not everyone gets that card. You have to like at least know my real name to get on that list. You know, like it's a small step list, but like, you know, I'm pretty comfortable. But like Danny said, most of us are survivors and it was not an easy road to get here. I have multiple violations in my past, some that people should have had felony offenses for, especially when I was young. But thanks to therapy and a lot of hard self-work over a decade, I'm proud. I have my degree in expressive arts therapy, and obviously I'm a believer in it. And I'm in therapy now as we go through this crisis and pandemic. You have to check in with yourself. And a mental health stigma is a thing, and it's a big thing in our community. So I just wanted to echo what everyone had said, and it's systemic and it bleeds on through. And I'm just thankful that the topics of race and these other hard topics came up today because it's so intertwined. Like I'm looking at it, we've been talking for over a half hour and we haven't even really talked fully about body types yet, but Danny started to build on it of this Western, and actually Bianca used the great references called T-shaped body. And I would say the female equivalent of that is being, a vase, your hourglass, but an hourglass that's like a size 2 somehow. I don't know how that's supposed to happen because I'm actually an hourglass, but my measurements don't fit into that cute little equation. And, and then like to take on the body type and what that does with roles and stuff, in my experience, like smothering play, it's going to be hard for someone who's a size 2 to be smothering somebody, right? So there is a reason why certain people be attracted to people's body types. And I think I would love to hear Danny and Bianca's take on what they think they get fetishized for. And personally, as well as, do you see that other places? Because I feel like that's a lot of my journey, is being fetishized for my body, positively and negatively, or I feel about that differently on certain days. And I was just curious how that works for you guys.
I think that's a great segue to jump right in, because that was going to be the next question too, staying on, addressing body dysmorphia in the queer kink and leather or BDSM community. So we'll toss it back to Danny and then to Bianca. Keep the conversation going.
Oh man, where do we go with this? Wait, can you just repeat this? Do you want me to talk about like body dysmorphia? Do we want to talk about like what Beth just like kind of threw out there with regards to like how our individual experiences around fetishization?
Yeah, maybe start with jumping off from Beth, but we looped in, because you had mentioned body dysmorphia as well, and that was going to be my next question. But I think it's all kind of, at some point, we're going to get to all of it in this next half hour. Between fetishes and then fantasizing what like people are supposed to look like or what you're attracted to, and inadvertently, discriminating folks within our own community. But you definitely can start with your own experiences.
Yeah, I think there's something to be said about, so as somebody who is Asian, I identify as Southeast Asian, so I'm brown. So I don't necessarily identify with like East Asian cultures. But that being said, like, I often get read as racially ambiguous, which is different for most Asian men, because on a whole, like kind of dominant culture and how it plays within gay men's space, as well as like queer spaces and kink spaces, is like, Asian women tend to be fetishized as like the dragon lady or like the geisha or something like that, and then like men are completely desexualized, completely like erased out of the equation. And so, this is why I quoted Girl Complex earlier, because I kind of identify with this sentiment of like, it is a radical act for me to actually exist within gay male white spaces and take up room, and to actually like be known as a skilled player, and to actually like be noticed. That being said, also like I don't experience the same type of fetishization that maybe some of my East Asian slimmer physiqued, male compatriots do within the Asian American community, trying to navigate either gay or kink spaces. So yeah, like that's, like I said earlier, like I recognize I have a certain level of like passability privilege, right? Like I can grow a beard. I'm very masculine presenting. I happen to play mostly as a dom when it comes to like play spaces. But yeah, like that's the weird thing that I've actually been experiencing lately, especially in terms of my own experiences with body dysmorphia, is my body dysmorphia looks very different now than it did back, when I was younger and when I was like kind of growing up. Example would be, I'm going to actually draw from another like kind of leader within my communities that I really admire, but there's Arya Saeed, who's the executive director of the Compton Transgenders Neighborhood Center. But she once described, when I was working with her doing community building within the trans community, she once said about like experiences for trans women is the bigger the pass, the bigger the clock, which meant that like the more you pass with, being read as like a cisgender woman, and when somebody clocks you, they find out that you're trans, they make a big show of it. And there's like this heightened anxiety around like being called out as a fraud, as not real. And I think there's something about my body dysmorphia getting worse or differently shaped and textured as I get older, because you would think that I have worked through some of the kind of pressures and the issues of passability within like gay male spaces, of like being accepted as like beautiful or being respected as skilled. But that's not necessarily the case. The more I get older and the more I pass as like having made it, the worse I actually feel. The more I'm just like, I just feel this weird fraud / like imposter syndrome that's constantly hovering around. And I don't know if other people experience that, but that's something that I've been struggling with, especially with the pandemic.
So I am in a different position, I think, definitely than Beth and Danny, is that as a Black woman, my body was fetishized to be curvy. And by God, I am. So I have the Coke bottle shape. It has a little more rolls than I'm normally comfortable with. But I feel like as a Black girl growing up, that I knew that I was always going to be thick, right? There was always a look to be thick. You always wanted to have the girl with the big butt, the girl with the big boobs. So for me, I never really experienced like some type of my own body dysmorphia. I've always been happy with my body as it was, whatever size it may be, as small or as large as it may be. But I always loved dressing specifically for my body shape. And when I dress specifically for my body shape, I get the pencil skirts, I get the high heels, I get the low collars, I get, they're very traditional dominatrix look, but I'm just dressing because that's what looks good for me. So I get fetishized as being someone's goddess, because they love to call me someone's goddess. They want me to be their goddess, and they want me to worship at my feet. They want to be, especially white men, love to be the Black goddess's special slave. And that's actually not me at all. It's not something I'm aware of, and something I'm comfortable with. But that's one of the things that they love coming after me for. They also love, especially gay men, love my breasts. I have a buxom chest size. And just like Beth says, walking through the bar, I get grabbed all the time. So I get praised for having this curvaceous body type, or to dress in corsets and anything that makes me super femme and even more high femme than I already am. The gay men, especially within the leather community, just fall over it. And I love it sometimes. Most times I love it. Most times, like, if I always, actually Girl Complex told me, if you ever wanted to feel good about what you look like that day, walk into a gay club. And you will walk out feeling amazing, because everyone's going to stop you. Girl, you look good, you look good, you look good. But sometimes it's a little bit too much. And sometimes it's a little bit too, I need to worship. That doesn't work for me. Or if I decide to go low key with my, my Air Force Ones and my latex dresses, which is just really comfortable and nothing else. It's just really comfortable. And my big hoop earrings, then I get fetishized as the girl from around the block who's going to be hood with you and who's going to sit there and do all these, whatever you think stereotypical Black girls do. And then you're going to just expand upon that and then run with that type of fetish. So for me, I can't win no matter which way I dress, no matter what I do. Someone's going to see me as they want to see me, and then just run with it. So my favorite thing is just to do what I want to do. And, if you want to do what you want to do, like I tell, like Beth said, sometimes, it's a pleasant conversation and sometimes it's not, so it's just, that's how I have to deal with it on an everyday basis, which is why I actually fully appreciate queer spaces, because I'm less fetishized, and I really enjoy POC only spaces, because my body type comes less into conversation when I'm in like a mixed space or a white space.
I'm going to go back to audience questions. Thank you so much for sending the questions in, and so keep sending them. We'll get them to our panel. You've talked today a few times about Western concepts of ideal body types. How are kink BDSM communities different in other countries and societies such as Africa, Asia, South America, and so on?
I think it's how your culture accepts bodies. So in certain parts of Africa, if you were actually a skinny woman, you were looked down upon. Whereas in the Western world, I'm supposed to be a size 6 at most, maybe an 8 on my bad day. In different cultures, it's not required for you to be this specific thin, blonde, petite, demure, but stern dominatrix or submissive, or this ultra masculine man. But Danny can speak to the men's portion better than I can.
I don't know, because simply I'm not from Asia. I was, I'm American, born and raised and everything. But that being said, I do have some international friends, and I think there's something to be said about, like, particularly when it comes to some of the Asian leathermen that I do know who are in, like, say, hubs where it is a little bit more visible, which is like Taiwan or like parts of Japan or parts of like Thailand. I think there's something to be said about, like, yes, you have this context of, like, your ethnic culture around you is more kind of representative of what you look like. But at the same time, leather as kind of a Western or originated thing, because the fact is, like, leather exists more popularly in North America than it does, say, in Europe. In Europe, like, rubber is actually a lot more popular. And it's also because, like, the relationship and history around, like, the Industrial Revolution, right? Like, but that being said, like, I think there's also something to be said about the parallels that I see between say, religion seeping itself into Asia, like, which for me is like, oh, that's just another form of colonialism. Fuck you. Like, let's kick out this, like, Jesus worshiping shit. That's not what my ancestors did. Why should we suckle on the nutsack of this whitewashed Jesus? And likewise, I think there's something to be said about, like, well, when we started importing and adopting images like Tom of Finland and, like, the porn in kink and, like, white masculine culture and importing it over there, it starts, like, affecting the attitudes towards, like, skin tone, body type as well. So yeah, I think there's a parallel to be glimpsed as far as, like, what are the ways in which the politics of desirability is in itself replicating emotional and psychological colonialism and imprinting upon people's sexuality across the globe, especially when America is just, like, one of those cultures that's just, like, not satisfied until it's consumed everything.
Yeah, that's a very good point. I was going to say, I can't quite literally have only been to Canada, so I'm not going to speak on an international level. I was an academic. I was busy my whole life. But from what I know of friends from other countries that are in, whether it's just the generalized kink community, which includes rubber and rope art, right? Like Asian cultures are kind of stereotypically known for rope art mastery and things of that nature. Tiger Yoshi comes to mind, and he's an American, but he knows a lot of that style. And there's books and books and books, and it's all from Japanese culture for the most part. And then there's a big German influence, right? And me growing up Italian Roman Catholic, body types was a weird situation. Like, we're all huge as hell, but we're in America, so we're trying to do the white girl thing, and it was confusing. And the Catholic overtones. So, like, there's a whole other aspect of this we haven't discussed, but, like, BDSM has a lot of, like, religious play, and a lot of that comes into play. And I know in Italy there's a big community also, and they kind of, like, keep to their own, which is kind of awesome in some ways. But yeah, so there's these different aspects of each internationalist community that I think we know on a general stereotypic basis, but, like, I really can't speak to it outside of that parameter because I quite literally have not left North America much at all. But, friends who have traveled and come back, I think for me, like, the body type thing, like, obviously people who come towards my direction like a curvier girl, and that could go either way. One thing we haven't highlighted, we've talked about like the goddess praise and stuff, but I've also been called a cow, and these really awful names in bed and elsewhere. And it's one of the first insults that anyone that I reprimand or tell them they're misspeaking about gender or sex or sexual harassment issues, especially if they're drunk, because I was a bar manager for quite some time and a bartender. The first two insults are already, yeah, you can probably say it with me, you fat bitch. That is the first two things. And I own that. I am a fat bitch. And I've had to just accept that, wow, you're really on point there if you can catch that, because obviously if you see me, meet me, you will get those two aspects very quickly in my personality. So I don't really take its face value. But that is what people do, right? People do quick assessments and judgments. And I think, again, back to pop culture, one of the things that comes up a lot is that's what gets highlighted is the quick references, because that'll appeal to the masses and make your product or movie or story sell and appeal to more people. And also, like, in an artistic way, like, I get the positive of that more people can relate to your art. That's awesome. But people take things at face value, and people make comic book references and make people fit into dimensions, because it's just an easier way to navigate your life. And when you get confronted by somebody, that's the first thing they're going to throw at you. And so again, for folks out there that are watching that encounter any of this, please know you're not alone. And I think one of the best things you can do when someone does that is smile and say, thank you for noticing, or really not take it to heart, because it's stupid. I don't know how else to explain it. It's a quick reaction. And I think, especially when it comes to sex, quick is a thing. People want to get off quick, and that's just part of this culture in a lot of ways.
I can't believe we've already spent almost an hour. I have so many questions. Like, for example, we started off talking about traditions and kind of, several different generations, and kind of the old guard isn't always happy with, the new younger generations coming into kink BDSM, because maybe things change, right? Like, not necessarily focusing so much on the binary. Ageism, stuff like ageism and accessibility. I had all these questions around that. I think where I want to go with that is it easier to call out, these bad practices or behaviors in a culture, that is kind of somewhat set in its ways? Or is it easier to create much more safe spaces, such as what Bianca was talking about? It sounds like, the queer community has kind of expanded and created their own safe spaces, especially for POC folks. Bianca?
I think you have to do both. I get in trouble a lot for doing both, and I'm happy to do it. But I have a mouth on me, and it doesn't know when to stop. So for me, we created the Unruly Social Club, and the Unruly Social Club is a BIPOC only non-male space. That's our space that we could create within the community. That's their space that we created. But I'm still going to walk into the powerhouse in San Francisco and demand that these old guards treat me with a level of respect that I deserve, because I have every right to be there, as much as they do. I have told them that in a speech actually in their bar. I don't think a lot of people are happy about it, but we've been around as long as they have, and I'm going to keep doing it, and I'm going to make spaces, and I'm going to change spaces, because why should I have to find my own?
Danny?
I think, at least for me, so I'm currently working on a memoir about my experiences growing up within a refugee community, as well as inheriting queer kink culture from survivors of HIV/AIDS. So, on one hand, I have parents who were displaced from the 70s, and then I got like mentors and people who raised me in terms of my sexuality and my identity around like being a gay man who survived HIV/AIDS in the 80s and 90s. And so I think there's something to be said about like there's trauma, particularly for some of these old guard folks who, for the most part, I have a lot of empathy for the fact that like you hobbled across the finish line. You and your ilk like survived a genocide. And so I think there's something to be said about like calling people in when they make mistakes, because I'm also recognizing that you come from a damaged background where maybe a lot of the people who you would have shared dialogue with to interrogate aspects of what does it mean to be privileged and be a man? What does it mean to check your misogyny? What does it mean to respect women and think beyond gender binaries and race and body types and stuff like that? And then likewise, I think there's a certain level of patience that I choose to exhibit when it comes to, you know, recognizing when somebody is maybe stubborn but completely coachable, but also recognizing like when I need to take a step back from that type of energy and find affirmation and tenderness and care from those who look more like me and people who share some of my generational concerns around body, gender, environmental politics. What does it mean to like fight to do anti-racist work within, you know, kink spaces? What does it mean to like actually say Black Lives Matter within a space where a lot of gay white men maybe get really upset because they think that means that their lives don't matter, you know? So it's about like kind of picking and choosing my battles, but also like not stepping away or not being shy of stepping up to the plate when a battle needs to be had.
Just to tag on that, yeah. I've been on, like, we're using these phrases, so I've been on the front lines of this conflict and many conflicts, from consent to body navigating, gender roles navigating, sexual violations and consent, like just kind of constantly. That is a constant conversation, right? And you jump in and out of being able to handle that. You have to have self-care. I know for a fact everyone on this panel right now, you wouldn't be able to do the level of work we're all doing in our realms without self-care. Quite literally, I have days in bed with my kittens and my baby, and we watch Moana and we watch Frozen 2, and I regroup so that you can go back out and have really tough decisions. Quite recently, in my most recent position with the district, you know, I am with all older white men. And that is a theme for me as well. And you have to pick and choose your battles, because I at least I feel that the most work that can be done is the conversations that go on in the background that maybe don't get done in one conversation. There's some folks that I basically I'm mentoring. It's not official, but like I'm constantly like, hey, calling you in again. Hey, I saw you doing this. What's going on here? How are you doing today? And I chose to do that, but I figure if everybody of a capacity to do so takes on a few, then that's how the education spreads, right? And if you really invest in somebody and call them in, like Danny used the term, it's one of my new favorites. It's just like time in versus time out for my daughter. Like it's like this new idea of being mindful, and quite literally, I love the term. It's used many times, like the generation of mindfulness. Is a thing we're in right now. It's a revolution, and some people choose to be in part of that discussion and some are not. When it comes to bodies and our topic, you know, in the BDSM culture specifically, I think we keep reverting back to a lot of what the three of us experience in the San Francisco community and the venues we've navigated. But, you know, it could look quite differently in different realms of the world.
I'm from New York.
Yeah, you're from New York too, that's
originally, right. And it's pretty much the same.
Yeah.
There's queer culture, there's men culture, men leather culture, and then it's mostly the same issues. I mean, and I've traveled all over the country
Right.
for, leather events. And it's pretty much the same wherever I've gone. So it's not just San Francisco.
Yeah, well then good, then I'm validated, because that's what I imagined, but I didn't want to speak to something I cannot. My experience on the East Coast has been quite limited because I was young and not supposed to be doing things, and then coming back now when it's pandemic and I can't go anywhere. So thank you for that, because that's what I see. I feel like these conversations are happening, and we're doing this today because it needs to happen, and we're going to start a ball rolling. And I hope that folks that have been listening to us have maybe related in some way or feel confronted in some way. Hopefully this was provocative in all its meanings, because going out and getting education or sharing information with people is quite literally how it seeps into like the collective consciousness. And I hope that as media goes on, the stereotypes that are in pop culture to our cultures, as well as body types and gender roles and everything we've discussed, I hope that it continues to evolve, because I see that happening, like quite literally, as shows get better and better. They're like, I was just watching Ratched on Netflix, and there's lesbian love scenes, and I'm like, yay, because you never see that. So it was very PG, like 13, but I'll take it. So it's just nice to see these things coming out a little more. And as like, I hope my daughter grows up in a very different, radical, different world than she has been born into. And I think that's what keeps me going and keeps me having these hard conversations. But at this point, a lot of it's behind the scenes. I, for my own safety and sanity, have taken my Facebook in particular presence down a notch. And I think that's okay to do from time to time, but I'm also in the background working on some really hard conversations, as well as putting together some stories finally. So, I think when you're a leader, when we get called a leader in this community, it's because people see you doing that work. So I wanted to thank everyone that's been involved with today, because it's part of that process. So just thank you for doing this. This is amazing.
I think Beth just said that we just collectively we just intellectually dominated the audience. So you're welcome out there. First session's free.
Hey, thank you, mistress.
We have a few or a couple minutes left, but I want to make sure that I ask some questions from the audience before we let you go. So we'll end with that. One person to answer this question: are leather, latex, rubber craftsfolk designing for diverse bodies? Do you all have issues getting what you need off the rack? Maybe no one should be buying off the rack. Bianca.
No one should be buying off the rack. You should find your local women-owned latex, latex in particular. You should find your local women-owned, your local fat-owned, your local black-owned latex designers. They are out there. I buy stuff all the time. If you can't find them, you should contact me and I will find them for you. I cannot find anything that will fit me at any traditional leather store. So everything that I own that's leather or latex, I make customized for me.
And for folks out there who are not finding local crafts folks who are designing stuff that works with your body, I have found some of the best non-binary, trans, and like different bodied designers on Etsy and on Instagram. I follow these great people. You can just check the hashtags. You can just search like the thing. Like some of my most prized like brown leather items have been made by like an East Coast trans male designer who we just worked online, just finding the right measurements for me. So they are out there. Support them. They're doing great work.
This audience is awesome. We keep getting questions. No one wants to let you go. I think you're onto something, in that we do need to have these.
Maybe we need a 2-hour conversation.
I know, right? I wanted to ask this question because it was also one of my questions. But COVID-19 and this pandemic. I mean, how are y'all connecting? How has it been different?
Yeah. So while I was managing the district, I at least tried to get and it's still going. I succeeded at this, but they have a happy hour once a week on Mondays, and they also have erotic storytelling hour every other week. And again, PG-13 style, but it's a way to connect with folks through Zoom. And I know that folks are doing their damnedest to like figure and navigate figure this all out. Like, I have the benefit that I have a live-in partner, so we're going to Atlantic City and have a hotel room for Sunday, and we're going to have our own Folsom. And I feel like we've all kind of branched out and pods. What was the term, Bianca, you were using at the beginning of bubbles or pods?
My bubbles. Yeah, I have bubbles of people. I have special bubbles.
I use the term germ pod.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah,
That's
so germ pod is, so I actually have a small germ pod, and that means people who I am in agreement with. I learned this term actually from the Radical Fairy campground up in rural Mendocino. Shout out to Groundswell, just because the residents of the land, they were, they invited me up, and so I got to join their germ pod after I passed a 2-week quarantine period. So now that I'm back in the city, I have a small germ pod of like just a couple of trusted friends. And this is one thing that I've had to learn from both being a gay man who, was mentored by survivors of HIV/AIDS, but also as somebody who worked within the public health sector for 16 years, which is we can learn from what like the survivors of HIV/AIDS did, which was think about the window period. Like in HIV testing, there's a 3-month window period, unless of course you're testing directly for the virus, which is an RNA test. But just go about assuming that everybody has freaking COVID. If there's a 2-week window period between infection and or it being asymptomatic or symptomatic and actually passing the virus and therefore not being able to infect other people, just assume that like everybody has it, but have, at least for me, what I've been doing with my germ pod is before we meet up, it's just having an open and honest conversation about going, what have you been up to over the last 2 weeks? Tell me every single detail, including your grocery store visit. Let's have an open conversation about what your social contact with, even if it's at a distance, even if it's socially distanced. It's like, have you had any sexual contact? Have you had any social contact? Have you been outside of your home quarantining? If so, let's have that conversation and see what is my comfort level. Also, on top of that, when was your last COVID test? And figuring out whether or not that risk is safe for you.
It's just like the safe sex conversation. You just have to treat it the same. Like when were you tested last and all those different things. I'm lucky enough to have my partner in my little bubble. So I am not touch starved, but I am definitely distanced from everybody else. I think a lot of groups are doing a lot of things online like we're doing right now. But I think, but I also know large organizations like the Mr. International Rubber is having their whole event online. The International Miss Leather competition is having their whole event online, and they're also doing a telethon online on the 14th. You also have groups who are doing education, like Onyx Northwest, where they are viewing their, they're having panels and people are discussing on, panels, and they're viewing it for everybody. I think doing everything that everyone else is doing, we're just, we might be less clothed than your regular Zoom meeting. That's just about it.
Y'all are just so great and incredible. I wish we could go 2 hours, but we can't. But we should do this. We should probably expand on the conversation because I didn't get to ask 12 of my questions. But the last question is from the audience. This goes to Beth. And thank you for such a great discussion. Can Beth mention some of those mentors and references she brought up?
Yeah, sure. Men's community wise, and Danny and Bianca, please add to this list because I know I'm going to blank out. But I know there's the Leather Men's Discussion Group, the Young Leather Men's Discussion Group, the Golden Gate Guards are quite formal, but if you're really want to know your history, I know the Exiles has, I think they still have it going. Okay. Has an Exiles program for women. There's also,
for anyone who doesn't identify as male.
Yeah, sorry, non-male. And there's also a few new ones coming out, and I don't want to say their names wrong, but anyone is always welcome to reach out to me. I am more than happy to be an almanac of resources and point you in the right direction.
There's also the Medusas of San Francisco, which is the new trans women only group. You have the Sirens, who are based out of Minnesota, and they are, again, a trans women only group. There's also a trans guy group, and I'm going to get so many hate messages for not remembering their name. I'm not remembering, sorry, but definitely hit me up for that. You have the Lesbian Sex Mafia. They have monthly workshops. They also are doing them on Zoom, so you don't actually have to be there in person. So anyone in the world can do that. There's also a lot of people online. If you're someone who's of color, Perverts of Color on Instagram always has classes being updated. A lot of things going on in LA. You have to find us online, and then we can get you right people, because it really depends on what you're into, who you are, and who you want to be with. That's very key.
Thank you all so much. Thank you to San Francisco Pride for continuing with their Lavender series and putting these important discussions together, and of course Commonwealth Club for the platform. And thank you all for joining us for this conversation. So if you're doing the Folsom Street Fair first ever virtual celebration, have a good time, and remember all the things that we talked about. Reach out to Beth, reach out to Bianca, reach out to Danny if you need more resources. And we have more programs coming up. If you'd like to see the full program schedule for the Michelle Meow Show program or the Commonwealth Club, head to commonwealthclub.org/online. We will see you next time.
Bye.